Bam! Aspasia, you're awesome.
Oh, you too. It's lovely to see you as
It's lovely
always.
to see you.
Uh,
I had a wonderful time in our last conversation.
Me too. Me too.
Yes.
It's nice. It's nice to get to know you more and more by doing the individual conversations as well.
Yep. Yep.
Uh,
Yep.
so the idea, I think at this stage in my mind, let's see where it goes, is to get a sense of Daniel the person a little more. Obviously there is a some kind of direction to that sort of leans back into how you show up at Voicecraft or how you contribute in Voicecraft. Um, but the way I've been thinking about it is so in therapy, there's this idea of the person of the therapist, like integrating the person of the therapist into what you do as opposed to just trying to be a therapist. And so I've been thinking about these conversations potentially as trying to get a better understanding of the person of Daniel
Mm.
um, as it relates to, your contributions at Voicecraft. But what is it of the person of Daniel that shows up at Voicecraft and that contributes in a way at Voicecraft, if that makes any sense at all.
Oh
And
yeah.
so there's
Oh
a few
yeah.
different ways we can go about that. There is a curiosity for me always to just get some vague kind of chronological outlay of who are you? Where did you come from? Um, you know, but actually one way that's useful to start these conversations is to ask you when you meet someone in a general sense and they say, "Oh, who are you? Tell me about yourself." How do you find that you naturally go about answering that question? And what happens inside you when they ask you that?
Well, my favorite answer is to say, "Oh yeah, well, remember we ran that sushi hot air company back in the '70s out of Richmond, Virginia, and we did that for 10 years before it like crashed and burned, and we did the music industry for 80." And you get one of two responses quickly. The person goes, "Absolutely, I remember that. It's so great to see you again. So how went the petting zoo that you started?" And you go,
Yeah.
"Ah,
And then
you're someone who's going to be a lot of fun." Or
yeah.
if they look at you funny, it's like, well, great, and you move on. I actually find banter is one of the most fun ways to introduce to
Yeah.
people because you find out quickly if the individual you are speaking to kind of enjoys to play, if
Yeah.
they're looking for exciting conversation, if they actually, there's something about banter that actually quickly suggests that they want to meet you. Not that they
Mm,
just see you and feel an obligation for information. So I
mm.
always like banter. So that Michelle will actually tell you that when we met in Clemens Library, it started with a hot air balloon company, a sushi hot air balloon company back in the '70s. And she was all over it. She was like, absolutely.
That's
So,
all you
that was
needed
really
to
good.
know. That's all you
Bam. I was
needed
like,
to
that's
know.
it. That's it. So banter is the number one way that I begin an intro that starts an introduction.
That's so interesting. I already have a like 3 hour conversation now to have with you about that. Um, I will briefly tell you why I find that interesting. Maybe that will relate back into the conversation. Um, I think the way that you described it is that banter and someone's willingness to take part in those first interactions is a good indication of their willingness to play. And I sign off on that. I think that's very true. And then there is almost an opposite experience of someone meeting you almost from the place of it's like being mined for information. That's how I talk about it. This person's just mining me to extract like needed information and that's it. And so I agree with that. Then there's also something though about people who use well, maybe it's not banter, but people who use humor in a similar manner that can be defensive. So there is a way that you can understand it that it's putting up I'm giving you lots of words and I'm doing lots of performative stuff, but you are not actually learning anything about me, nor am I answering your question. It could be interpreted like that, but
Oh, yeah.
I think what you're talking about with the banter is it's actually um, it's meta, isn't it? It's actually in seeing someone's willingness to go off track or to be taken sort of off guard or to like and then to still want to engage with that is actually an indicator. It might help to establish trust. It's an indicator then of whether or not I want to open up. So it can be sort of like a first entrance, like a doorway. Banter is a doorway.
Oh, absolutely. And there is something about the element, even about you saying putting up a defense, in the sense of, if you really want to meet, then
Yeah,
let's see if you want to play. And
that's
then
right.
if the trust is established, oh yeah, well, when I was a kid, I would spend all the time walking the woods, writing the Sword of Tribulation. I had a photography business. When I was 15, I did that for 10 years, weddings, did galleries, stuff like that, lived on the farm, mostly got lost in the woods. But you see, that kind of information for me, like you said, there's a kind of thing where there's kind of information mining, and actually there can be a way too where people almost feel entitled to know about you and to get your biography and information, like they have a right to it in different things. And there's no surefire way to be able to identify quickly the kind of person that you're dealing with, but banter tends to be pretty useful. There's no perfect signal, but banter tends to be a pretty good indication of if the person you are speaking with is actually looking for human beings, not just minds of information. And also too, the other thing that could be nice, if somebody asks me, you do the banter, what did you do today? Another thing that could be done is you start off, you say, okay, well, you go, okay, oh yeah, no, this morning we had some work over at the venue, and you just think about what you did. We had some work over at the venue. We had to meet someone for a client and work on a contract. We did that. We also had a paper that we were writing on, kind of comparing how Federal Reserve spending can be thought about as a trade-off of wages for hours. You say you trade off the wages for hours, so every they create money by adding more work. Then we were also kind of thinking about kind of what is beauty, and then we had dinner around 5 o'clock, and then we took the kids down to the creek. So what you do when you introduce, you throw out a kind of buffet. And what's very interesting is, if someone is an idea person, they tend to go, oh, well, what were you thinking about beauty? Oh, so we've kind of indicated that this person might be interested in philosophy without making them feel forced into philosophy. Because I didn't just, you offer if they're a work person, they might say, oh, well, what's going on at the venue? Okay, that really quickly tells you that this person is not philosophy oriented. Well, that's perfectly fine. There's nothing morally superior to philosophy to talking about the work, but you offer 5 options when you introduce one that is very like concrete work, something about the family, something about a book, something about an idea. And the person, based on their personality, tends to pick out of their 5 which of those they want to talk about, which also very quickly says a lot about them. Because when I speak to someone, I want to meet them in the kind of person they are. If they're a business-oriented person that's not really interested in ideas, then I don't want to make them feel forced to talk about ideas. I want to talk about the venue. But if they are an idea-oriented people, well, a lot of them go through their entire life never getting to talk about ideas and never knowing if it's safe. Well, I've just quickly sent an indication that you are safe to talk about that if that's something you're interested in, right? So banter, I don't know if I want to call it the buffet strategy, but it's a kind of buffet strategy that you offer in an introduction that provides a way to identify who you're talking with.
Yeah, but what I'm hearing about you is that you the part of what you're doing there is taking care of other people's feelings as well. And and there's obviously, places where that can, we can talk about sort of the divide where one might do that to their own detriment at some point, I'm not sure. But in basic terms, you are describing a process of taking care of the feelings of the other in that interaction, imagining, what it might be like for them to hear you talk about only philosophy if they were not philosophically minded, all these things. So in offering the buffet, you are also able to discern more clearly what they might like to know more about with you, which can then also strengthen the relational development, and the connection, because it's, you're not, but there is an element I'm hearing of deep care for the other person's experience of you and the conversation. Right, because, and this comes back to what I was saying, I think, about, sometimes humor can be overused as a defensive strategy when it's just that and that's the end, right? We make lots of jokes and whatever, and then the time has passed and you walk off and now no one knows each other. And that might suit the person well. They've kept the person at a sufficient distance. And the reason I bring that up is that it was definitely the case that once I started to look more closely at, my defenses, that there's, that I could see all these ways in which I would use that sort of thing to keep the other person not knowing me, right? Like, as long as I remain the kind of like laughing, smiling, making jokes, engaging in only what they want to engage in the conversation. I'll sort of let them pick and lead. That, like you said, like it keeps me safe. Then I found that people then didn't really ask me that much about me, because now they're talking about their favorite things to talk about. And this is obviously all unconsciously so. I wasn't so clearly aware of it then. But it kept me safe, I guess. But then it also kept me disconnected. And so it's lovely to hear you frame it in this way, because it's helping me to put words to. So obviously I went from realizing that about myself to then going, oh, I should try not to do that then, like in particular places. And so catching myself naturally doing it and pulling back from it, right? But then obviously the pendulum swings too far the other way. And now I am fighting back against my natural desire to be fun and playful and humorous and banter. And then I found that wholly unsatisfying. And then I'm sort of left with this tension of, well, am I being defensive and I'm not meant to be doing that? Or, I mean, it wasn't really that complicated to sort out. It's usually the balance thing and figuring out, each individual interaction. And but it was really nice to hear you state that you use banter in that way, and it helped me understand what I do as well. Yes.
Well, well, I appreciate it. For me, whenever you meet someone, there's kind of a problem in the sense of, like, when I say problem, it is, I have no idea what you like to talk about, who you are, if you can be trusted, if you're a good person, if you want to go deep, if you're information mining, there's no way to know. And also the problem is, if you're direct about it, it fails. If I say to you, hey, Aspasia, I want you to feel comfortable. Now this is awkward, right? If I say, I'm here to have a good conversation, it doesn't work. So you have a problem of directness ruining it. You can't be direct, but then you also have to figure out how to be indirect, not to avoid, but almost like an artist.
Yeah.
Like an artist shows, they don't tell, right? Well, that's really weird. How do you show without telling to create a feeling where the person, you're able to find out the signal through the noise? Yeah. Because the other way too that helps me, like, you can wonder those questions like, oh, is banter faking? Am I not being authentic, or different things? But if I think about it in terms of, no, we're looking for signals for the other person to feel at home or invited or alive, then these are not the questions. It is not the right questions of asking, is this me? It's more so, the questions are, do these work to create a space of engagement, of conversation, of relationship, of friendship, and different things, right? Yeah. And so banter, for example, like you're saying, you're throwing out signals to the person to say what kind of conversation this is. And you're also, in that, yes, you are trying to determine if this is someone who you can trust, who you can actually give, there's not just emotional trust, there's also time trust, in the sense, I'm trusting you with my time, that this is going to be something that, it doesn't have to be rewarding for me, but there's something at least creative about it, there's something artistic about it, there's something life about it. It's not really utilitarian, it's more like, was this a work of art in this engagement? Was it participating in something higher? And so you want to get a sense of if that's going to occur. And also with something like the buffet strategy, the buffet strategy is there because otherwise you have to, the other key to that buffet strategy, in my opinion, is you don't say general things, because the general category is too vague. If I say, oh yeah, well, it's too vague. If I say, oh, we have a venue, we like philosophy, and I have kids. They don't know what to respond to.
They can't latch on. Anything. That is also can be defensive, is when people go vague. So
absolutely,
I hear what you're doing. You are, what I hear in you as you describe this, though, is I hear someone who has a deep care and reverence for relationship and the possibility of relating, right? I mean, I'm not surprised by that, having got to know you, more recently, but that I really, really hear that alive in the way you're presenting this, versus it being driven by a fear of someone getting too close to you. It's actually from a deep reverence and respect and care for the possibility, and there is that timepiece to it. You're right. It's like an investment, and knowing, trying to almost to carefully go about that at the front end, as opposed to as opposed to it being so in order to open up and maximize what might be available there. Does that make sense? Versus a move that is just, yes, I do lots of smiling and laughing and making jokes and pay lots of attention to you and what you want to talk about, so that the time will pass and you'll go away and I can get back to being alone, right? Like that. So like, I obviously don't hear that in you. So that's obviously more fear driven. You're talking, or anxiety driven. Whereas you're talking about really paying careful attention to the possibility of any relationship that may be before you, to put it in those terms. Through this artistic sensing. It is like a relational sensing that you are doing. It's like procedurally, I guess is the word. It's not declarative. Yes. Anyway.
Well, I'll just comment. I mean, I guess for me, I think about relationships, interactions, conversations. Metaphorically, for me, I think about them kind of like works of art. For many people, because like we talk about intimacy, for me, if you can create an artistic experience, it also creates the feeling of intimacy. But if you actually aim for intimacy, then you can create nervousness. So there's always this weird thing, like C.S. Lewis talks about, if you put first things first, you get second things also. But if you put second things first, you lose both. But then, of course, the question is, what is the first thing? Because you have to decide that, right? Some people say, well, it's about emotional intimacy. Well, maybe, but it seems like often, in my opinion, when people directly aim for emotional intimacy, that's precisely gets rid of it, because it's too nervous, it's too fragile. And emotional intimacy is the description of a substance. But the question is, what is the substance, right? It's more of an effect. You find yourself in intimacy more than aim for it, right? And yet that doesn't mean it's random. This is the trick. And the way to think it, for me, this is metaphorically like a work of art, because the work of art creates effects. And then you're like, how did he even do it? Well, the artists knew exactly what they were doing. They were very prepared, but it seems like a magic trick. That's always the wonder of it, right? Like the moment I always just like to think about is that moment when suddenly you're reading a book and a movie appears in your head. Like you're suddenly in the Shire. How did Tolkien do that? You think it's by chance? There are many novels you can read where the movie never appears in your head because the sentence structure is not right. The descriptions are too general and the movie never appears. But if the movie appears in your head, there's a reason for that. The writer is intentional. And it works precisely because you don't notice it working. It just happens, right? Well, I think emotional intimacy is like that. I think good friendship is like that. I think the best conversations are like that. I think I think ideas, your best ideas tend to come out of nowhere. They tend to just kind of appear, right? So the question is the following. What are the conditions, the preparatory work, like the artist learning how to write the sentence, that needs to be done to create that effect in conversation between people? And to me, that's a lot of how I think about it. Like, how do you till the soil? Like, because if we can create a work of art, or create that we arrive at something that we didn't know where we were going to arrive at, that's what a great work of art does. Well, then the emotional intimacy is there. Then the friendship is there. All those things tend to come from it, because here's the other thing. You always have the problem of whatever you aim for becoming utilitarian. Like if you aim for friendship, oh, well, now it's utility. And the problem is, here's the problem. You're then looking for signs of friendship. Oh, no, now we have a surveillance state. You're not doing the things that a good friend does. Oh, no, you're telling too many jokes. People become very surveillance-y when they're looking for intimacy. And so that always gets in the way. But if instead you go in asking the questions of what are the conditions that create the 2 hours go by and you don't know where it went, or the I'm having thoughts I never had before, wow, I really know this person because of what they share, then you get the emotional intimacy. Then you get the deep thought. If your goal is to be a philosopher, you won't be. Philosophy has to be a secondary thing. It has to be something you just find yourself doing. Good conversation has to be something you find yourself doing. And so for me, stuff like the banter, and then I'll give it back to you, stuff like there are others. The reason why for me, the way I think about a lot of this is indeed as a fiction writer, because we do, O.G. Rose means Opperman, Garner, Rose from 2011, where we did all the fiction, Turn the World, Digressions, and all these different things. We didn't know it meant original gangster. We found that out in 2019, but it was too late. Alas, it's okay. Opperman, Garner. But the idea is in fiction, you tell a story. The human mind loves particulars. There's something, James Wood talks about this in his book on literary criticism. Particularity Say Dublin enjoys. You love that. Your mind naturally feels alive by the particularity.
Yes.
But if I talk about Ireland,
Yeah.
not that you dislike Ireland, but it's hard to make it like your hand. It's hard to make it
I can't
holdable.
grasp it.
But
Yeah.
you can't grasp it. And so when you meet someone, it's important that you give them a particular thing you did. Not tell them that you like philosophy or something or like business. You give them a particular thing you did at the venue. I was working on a contract, or we were taking out pine trees Mr. Clark was taking out with the pine trees or different things. Okay, well, now I've given you a particular story using heavy equipment. There's a very high chance that once in your life you've done something with heavy equipment, so you might be able to latch onto that and tell me a story about heavy equipment. And now I know that you're interested in manual labor, so I'm probably going to focus on talking about the farm, on different things, right? But then if I tell you also a particular idea on beauty and philosophy, you can latch on to that. So particularity, this is the point. Particularity allows story. The person can create a story. The other key too is, as a little note, and I'll give it back to you. And if you're talking philosophy, don't use jargon. I mean, there's always going to be some jargon you have to use. You need to description, metaphor, as much clarity as possible, because without that, the other cannot latch on and you can't create something together. Now, again, I'll use Hegel language because sometimes you just can't help it, but you always got to be paying attention when you're talking to use it less than more, unless you're talking with another Hegelian and it's a private conversation. Okay, well, then it's there, but there's something about all of these things are part of telling a story or making a story. Please.
Well, I'm a prime example of that. You will find no philosophical jargon here.
That's a good thing.
Well, yeah, it can be. Yeah, it can be.
Yeah.
I think I think that's really, I do think that that's really important for people to know as they come into the Voicecraft fold too, though, that whole spectrum is there. Like, you don't have to know the jargon, but also knowing the jargon is not a problem. Oh, there was a lot you just said there that's important. The particularity I do want to latch onto for a second, because even if we go back to what we're calling the buffet, I know that's not the best term, but if we go back to the buffet technique, you are actually establishing emotional intimacy as you do that, because you're providing particulars. So if you are providing the buffet, right, and one of those happens to be, and then we were up on the hill and we were pulling out pine trees and it involved this guy and whatever and my children, and well, that's very revealing and vulnerable. How this person knows, that you have pine trees, you're on a hill. There is a lot there that you are telling about yourself, and you're showing a willingness to actually share that. So that is deeply vulnerable when you are establishing intimacy. So there is also a modeling there and a signal to the other person that you are open and receptive and willing to contribute in that manner, which brings us back to actually contribution. And there's a lot that you just said there that I would love to go down a pathway of talking about therapy, but I'm not going to, because we're here to also talk about the Voicecraft context. So everything that you were just talking about there, about sort of this setting the conditions or finding your way, and these rather than trying to use your words necessarily or explicitly to set those terms, it's actually about the movement. What is it for you that I mean, I'd love to know the actual story of what led up to you even engaging in Voicecraft, and we can do that in a second. But first of all, what is it about Voicecraft that you think relates to that idea, or that for you, your experience of that?
Excellent. The quick answer is that everything we're just describing about going into a conversation as making it something like a work of art, that is what I think Voicecraft does. And I don't actually think, there's a lot of, Toastmasters in the Jefferson Literary and Debating Society. We did an oration class, debating society. All that is not teaching that. That's the issue. There's actually some sort of conversational skills or way to carry yourself in a conversation that is completely missing, that is modeled at Voicecraft. And I'm actually of the opinion that what is modeled at Voicecraft is basically what is completely necessary for the survival of democracy in a global pluralism or pluralistic relationships or human beings under mass complexity and psychological pressures. So basically, the model of Voicecraft is the way of conversation and engagement that in 2024 planet Earth is utterly necessary. And I don't think it's taught by, I don't think Toastmasters does it. I don't think, I do associate Voicecraft with crafting the voice. There is a certain crafting of the voice. Well, and the great Hyrule mentioned this once, is there's something about this, there's a circling dialogos element of Voicecraft, but it also is about a particular subject. It's also about going into a depth, but not losing the people in their emotional centers and their personal selves in that engagement with the subject. But that's what good fiction does. And in my mind, that's what good philosophy should do. There's actually a way, or deep thought. The word we use for deep thought as a general category is philosophy. By philosophy, to anyone listening to this, we do not mean technical knowing the history of philosophy. It's that love of wisdom. And I think I really do like how DC Sindler describes it, because I think it's correct. Love of wisdom is the love of being gathered under something beyond you in a dance. So philosophy is the love of dance, if you will. Philosophy is this dancing. Love of Sophia, Lady Sophia, love, dance, gathering under this thing. That's, I think it actually is a massive problem that philosophy is now a category of education, because when I say philosophy, it sounds like a specialist field. And at this point, we really don't have a better alternative word. You could say logos. Heck, I'm halfway ready to call it Voicecraft if we want, because there's something about good philosophy that is actually Voicecraft. Like, good philosophy is a mode of conversation, not just deep discussion. That's what we see modeled in the Platonic dialogues. In all the best philosophy, you cannot separate the ideas from the mode of conversation. No more good fiction that you can separate the structure and style of the prose from the story. These things are inseparable, and if you separate them, then you get pathologies. You get
this is therapy too, right? Like, I mean, I can't help it, but you can't separate the content from the process. And there's, you know, there's many ways in which I guess psychologists in particular get trained in a manner that is hyper focused on content, and loses so much of the richness of the procedural stuff, and the process. And yes, we won't go. I will keep us. I will move back here. So I really love that answer. I'm tempted though to get. I'm tempted to get more of a sense. And this might sound very reductionistic, and it is. But anyway. What are the particular aspects then? Because I agree with the way that you're framing it. But if someone is trying to, from outside, or is new to Voicecraft and is trying to think about, from your experience of taking part in these sessions and contributing, what are the particularities of what goes on in those sessions, though, that might be part of this larger experience that you're describing? What are the particularities? Is it that people are given the sort of space and people just like, you know what I mean? What are the particularities that you think generate this experience more broadly?
Well, I'll describe it this way. Let's say we have a Voicecraft session about AI. I'll just use that because that's what's popular, right? All right. So you have AI, you have you, and you have the relation between you and AI. So there are three things that are actually going on when the subject of a conversation is AI. 99% of conversations about AI are going to leave out you and the relation and just talk about the AI.
Yes.
So it's going to be about the AI. Now, other conversations will be like, well, how are you feeling today? So there's no relation to AI, it's just about you. Another mistake actually can be if you're too meta, where you just talk about relation and not, you know, so right there.
Yes.
The kind of conversation I am of the strong opinion is an art form that is absolutely necessary on planet Earth 2024, is where you keep all three together at all times in the conversation. Which, of course, you say, well, we're stuck in sequential brains, so how in the world do you keep three things together and it be intelligible, right? Well, there's a particular art form where you say, wait a minute, we've been talking about AI too long. We need to go back to us. How are we feeling in light of AI? Wait, we need to talk about what AI is making us think about, not just AI. Okay, we're losing sight of the technical details of AI. Oh, actually, what is the relation to us with AI, regardless if it manifests in the way we're talking about. Notice what you're doing. You're moving between all the different levels and the interplay between those levels for the sake of elucidating the trinity or the triplex of the three factors, you, relation, AI, right? That is, reality is geometrical. Reality is not algebraic. Reality is not point. Reality is all three at the same time. And if you cannot describe all three at the same time, you will be alienated in the conversation by not knowing AI, or whatever you say about AI won't really apply to you because we're talking about AI, not you. So in order for it to not be alienating, but also productive and also insightful, and also if we don't talk about AI at all, then AI is still in your world and you're overwhelmed by not understanding everything. So then you're going to close off and be like, I just don't want to think about it. Well, that's pathological. But then if we just talk about you, not in light of a world with AI, well, then we're setting you up to be fragile when AI comes around and you have to make decisions about it. So you have to do all three. Otherwise, you're setting people up to fail, basically, in different ways. But how to do all three, let me just describe one skill needed for that. You have to sense when you're going too far in one direction versus the other. Well, what?
Yep.
What's that? What's that skill? What's that skill of sensing? Okay. Sensing is basically, if we follow Aristotle on wisdom, and I was speaking to the great Thomas Jockin about this, sensing is necessarily experiential. So if I were to ask you when you're in therapy, don't you have a sense when the conversation is going X or Y way? If I were to say, well, write down on paper the proof of that sense, you would be like, no, that's not how this works. Well, that's how an artist is. When an artist knows that they need to structure the sentence X way versus Y way, and using certain words versus others, where does that sense come from? It comes from years of the craft. That's basically the only way to get it.
Right.
Oh, wait a minute. That means the skills of Voicecraft can only come from there being a continual community of Voicecraft in which people can gain the experience and have more and more people do it. Because if everything comes down to, and I think it basically does, the ability of human beings faced with complexity to keep all three, I'll just call it the triplex, if we use that for short.
Well, I was thinking of the like tripartite. It's just
tripartite. Oh, that works.
Tripartite.
The tri. We'll call it the tricycle. How about the tricycle?
It's also amazing. I will just quickly say it's also amazing, even the brain, the way you're talking about that the brain is actually arranged in three levels as well. But anyway.
But this is the issue, is like literally our conversation structures do not reflect the actual image and likeness of the human being. So they're fundamentally alienating. Like that's the problem. Like the human brain operates geometrically, and yet most of what we encounter is not geometrically. So they're alienating. They leave something out. You have to make everything match the image and likeness isomorphically per se of everything else if it's going to be fitting. If you don't do that, then you leave something of the human out.
That's right.
And what you leave out can be a problem. So I think, and then I'll give it back to you. So this triplex that are tripartite or different things that would do, or tricycle, or tri, maybe the tri, tri-three, triangle. I'll call it the triangle. That's good. I can handle that word. Triangle, we'll call it the triangle. Basically, conversation requires the triangle to function in a global pluralistic world, 2024, of ever complexity. The only way you can do the triangle, at least one skill, is the sense we're describing. And the only way you do that is continual experiencing of the triangle in the effort to get better. And then you develop the sense. Well, then you need regular interactions like you see at Voicecraft. So to me, that's kind of the things the community brings up.
Yes. I was talking to Tom and he was talking about it as like a tuning fork. Right. But we're going to call it the tuning triangle now.
Oh, yes. The tuning tune. I'm going to call it the tri-tune.
Oh, no, yeah. No, that sounds like it needs to be like,
that's actually it. The tri-tune. Oh my gosh. The tri-tune.
Something.
I'm going to use that.
Yes, the sensing and the tuning. It's because I guess I'm also hearing you talk about Voicecraft as facilitating integration, you know, like it's, and but in order to facilitate integration, sometimes people must first experience the fragmentation. They have to be aware that that's even occurring in order, and I think even that. So yes, the integration is important, but the sensing and the tuning that you were talking about, that's that's definitely, if we call it a skill, that's definitely a skill or an aspect of yourself that there's not a lot of other places to learn to start to tune into. And yes, I mean, in therapy, you can call it countertransference. In the kind of therapy I do, we give it a name. It's called the Unconscious Therapeutic Alliance. Yes, it's vital, and it's what's missing. So what I'm hearing from you is part of what you see is so richly experienced through Voicecraft is this I guess it's like a playground to some extent too, isn't it? It's like it's facilitating play in a way that is also allowing you to become more aware of your own sensing ability and to start to even tune your tuning. Tune, yeah. And in doing so is helping you to integrate these many levels, layers, like however you want to frame it. So Daniel, more, I guess, more blandly, or blandly is not the right word, but more reductionistically, what are just the basic steps of how you came to Voicecraft? Because I don't even know that. When did you first take part in Voicecraft, and how did you find it? And what was that like for you, those first encounters?
Well, when I was lying under the rubble of my wrecked hot air balloon, and Tim Adlin pulled me out and said, I have a place for you. After my business went bankrupt,
Wow.
it really worked out. So it goes
Really?
well. But no, if I was found under the rubble still alive of a hot air balloon, then if Tim Adlin found me and wrapped me in swaddling clothes and like brought me with him to Voicecraft, that would be the most beautiful thing. And I would tell that story on every opportunity I had, because it would be so.
Is that actually representative of something that happened though, or it's not? It's a
That
wild.
is an excellent question. So what happened is the great and fantastic Cadell Last invited me to be part of a Philosophy of Lax series, and he invited me, Tim Adlin, and Alex Ebert to be in this conversation because I had known Cadell for a bit and had worked with him and had gotten to know him. So we were invited to that. Fell in love with Tim, followed him over to Voicecraft, and here we are. All these years later. So it
How long
started
ago
with
was
the
that?
4 years, 2020, 19 maybe. I guess it was more like March 2020 or something like that.
Okay.
So I followed Tim over from the Philosophy of Lack series because I really appreciated to me, like I said, it was I felt that Voicecraft was indeed filling this, you could say, need, this need of a way of speaking that no one else was doing. And to me, that was very precious and mattered. I mean, I'll just say, like like on this idea, the other thing I'll say that has always stood out to me at Voicecraft is you have this tri-tuning, and also this awareness of that speaking is a big deal. Like the voice is like some sort of expression of some inner space that is very powerful. If you're going to speak, it matters. Sometimes in religion, they'll talk about a reverential fear. That's not anxious fear, but a certain sort of, this is a big deal. I think one of the things that has really gotten us in trouble is that we don't treat speaking with a kind of reverential fear, which is actually a good thing. And I'll note this, the best artists treat creativity with a reverential fear. They know creativity can destroy your life. Like the muse shows up one day and you're not ready for it. It might destroy you, actually, and Voicecraft has an understanding that there's something about the voice we have to work with, but what we have to work with is dangerous. And the way we work with it is more like tri-tuning versus the structure that we're given. That means it has to be trained. So for me, there's a way in which you can associate it with almost like a religious ritual, which at its best form, which you could, the artistic act is a religious ritual. And I don't see treating speaking at oration or speech clubs or a lot of places online, do not treat speaking as a kind of reverential act of great force and power, of which it is. And again, the more complex and the more ideas and the more connected we all are, the more this thing called voice gets unleashed upon the world. And if we don't treat it with the right respect in speaking, then it could be a force of great destruction. Just like all the best things can be, all the most wonderful things in life are also the things that, if mishandled, are the most destructive, just like love and beauty and different things like that. So the philosophy of lack series is also relevant in the sense of, and I've been doing work with Thomas Jockin and Javier on this idea that philosophy had lost the category of lack. In Aristotle, you have being and nothing, but there's a third category that I think is actually central for the metaphysics, which is lack. And by lack, what Aristotle means is a present absence, something that is here and not being here. Mm-hmm. So, for example, when I don't want a cup of coffee, it's nothing to me. But when I want a cup of coffee and it's not here, it's lacking. Because it's a present absence, right? So the argument is that actually most of human existence is a relation to lack, not merely being, not merely nothing, but lack. And most of the time we speak out of our lack, in insecurity of lack and for lack. And so the philosophy of lack for me leads directly to the question of voice, because very often voice is speaking to articulate or to manage lack. And if we do it pathologically, we end up in trouble. There's another way in Aristotle, and then I'll give it back to you, where lack is the opening of beauty. So if you hold it in the right way, the thing that is presently absent is transcendent. But then there's another form of lack of what is presently absent is the thing that you're avoiding, that you're trying not to talk about because you haven't faced that. So it's your source of anxiety. So lack, this is the funny thing. Lack metaphysically is both the source of anxiety, but it is also the source of the transcendent. It's the same metaphysical form. The transcendent is lacking, it's a present absence, but anxiety is also a present absence. So the question is, how do you hold or voice or manage the thing? And that's also where, for me, Voicecraft, if we take the metaphysics of lack seriously, now you also have to get into, not to put everyone to sleep, differences between like primary substance, first substance, partial objects, all these fun things. So I'm not saying that I'm not saying beauty and anxiety are equivalent. I'm saying that metaphysically, they are formally similar, and the tools by which we deal with them have a lot to do with voice and speaking and relations. So that's the space of learning how to have the right reverential tri-tuning by which we go about leaning more toward beauty than anxiety. But I give it back.
Yeah, how is that different to you from longing and desire? Like how
they're definitely connected. They're absolutely
like the through absence, like
yes.
Anyway, that's probably a conversation for another time.
That's actually excellent though, because Thomas Jockin and I that's what we just talked about a lot. Because so for example, it's the relation to the partial object. If I have a partial object, there's basically generally two ways I relate to it. I honor it as a partial object and know I need to actually keep it as a partial object so that it continues to be a source of desire that motivates me to know myself more so in light of the partial object. But then there's the partial object of, I'm going to make it full. I'm going to get that big other. I'm going to complete it, right? And that's when the partial object, same metaphysical form, but different relations to it, that one leads to a kind of honoring and reverence, the other leads to a pathology that ultimately leads to something self-effacement. So it absolutely has a lot to do with how we treat desire and longing, and that we see desire and longing as the conditions by which we can experience a partial object as beauty, as opposed to let our longing and desire controls us to a place of opening Pandora's box, if you will, or doing something that's more self-effacing.
It's related to will, though. I know that's a very fraught word.
Sure.
But yes, sort of a with yes. And it's also related to a rejection. So, a rejection of the being with it as it is.
Absolutely.
In order to, yes, there's so much I could say there. What you're talking about with the Voicecraft context and what did you call it? The reverential fear of voice. And that I don't know that you said it so much in these terms, but what I was thinking as you were talking is it sounds a bit like the voice should be taken seriously, and the manner in which one uses it should be taken very seriously. But through just becoming aware of that, one may be paralyzed through fear. And so to have a forum or a context in which one can go and actually lean into spontaneity as well, sometimes first as the entry point, to therefore start to play. It's like the playground. With and obviously to do that, to go to be spontaneous with your speech, your voice, in a manner that is intending to tune it over time, or help to somehow over time tune your sense, your inner sense of I don't know what, of value, of meaning. I don't know what it is, but you're essentially going there like a training ground. Well, you could be. It could be one reason why you're going there, like a training ground. I think this point's important. I'll tell you why, because you know, for some people who listen to this, it may be that they are immensely aware of the fear of their voice already, and feel that they need to reach some sort of place already of knowing how to manage that before entering something like Voicecraft, right? Before entering such conversations. But I think there's a distinction, I guess, I'm trying to make here between Voicecraft sessions, as even though they are taken very seriously, I don't mean this to sound like they're not very serious matters. But there is a latitude there for some spontaneity and play. Like there is this flexibility, this breathing almost that goes on, this sort of like inhale and exhale that's always going on. And I think that is sort of contained, it's beautifully contained and maybe metabolized or something by the presence of everyone there, and also just the manner in which it's undertaken. I just say all this, I guess, to highlight that you can really be, in my mind anyway, and tell me what you think of this, you can really be sort of anywhere on that, if we want to call it a spectrum of, you know, where you are already in terms of feeling that you know how to do this well, or just further refinement versus I've never really opened my mouth in any social setting. I feel there's something that I could be saying. I don't know how to do it. I'm very scared of saying the wrong thing. I wouldn't want that to, I guess, prohibit someone from feeling that this is still a forum or a context that they can engage with. And this does actually link to what I was talking with Tom about, in the same respect that, at least for me, I've experienced there's something about Voicecraft that even though I'm anxious, less so now, but especially at the start, anxious in some of those sessions, there is a warmth and a care with which those conversations are held and your contributions are held. But it's not just a like a soothing comfort. It's also calling to you and drawing. It just somehow happens to meet you at the right point between like kindling the fire in a very gentle, kind of nuanced, human, you know, really refined manner that feels caring and nurturing, at least maybe for me, maybe not for everyone, versus also you are kindling a fire. So it is actually helping to build something more powerful within you. So it feels like both, I guess, a powerful, I guess like a masculine force and a feminine force at once. It's that reverence for voice, but done through a really deep care and reverence for human relationship. And that actually links back to what you were talking about right at the start when you're talking about, you know, you're someone who uses banter as sort of that door, that entry point, right? Well, maybe and sometimes, not always, right? And that's the same thing as you described your reasoning behind that. I heard a person who is very very motivated by caring for the other, and but caring for the possibility and potentiality of every relationship that you might encounter, and also a reverence for not knowing what could possibly be there, and trying to, like I said, like maximize almost you know, what this could become by offering these options, but doing it in a really refined kind of thoughtful manner, taking into account the comfort of the other person who's there. All these things that you were describing about banter actually in some roundabout way relate at least to part of what I experience in Voicecraft that has made it a place where I definitely feel that I could grow in my ability to do these sorts of things. Even as a therapist, like that's actually quite a separate construct, you know, like there's very little about my comfort in the therapy room that translates over to Voicecraft. It's very different. So this is supposed to really be more so focused on you than me, so that you know, people can get a sense of you. But I sense you have a question or something. Do you want to share something?
So you were pointing out and getting at, I think, one of the most consequential mistakes of, dare I say, the modern world, that has actually led to all sorts of trouble. So first off, I will also note some people may hear the banting stuff and says that sounds very calculating. You're like calculating what's going to be said. Yeah. Well, you have to realize you have to do certain things to open horizons of possibility. And if you don't open horizons of possibility, well, then relation can't occur on a deeper way. So there is, like, the artist has to get the canvas. They have to get the paint. You say, well, they're calculating. They should just create. You have to till the soil. And one of the problems is people have actually, this is an example where they put intimacy first. They say, well, no, you shouldn't think anything. You should just be open to whatever occurs. And as a result, you don't get intimacy. Whereas if you put the creative act first, then the intimacy comes. You also pointed out how if you tell people a story about how your kids and you were picking up rocks, there's an intimacy in that. Exactly. The intimacy comes second to the story. Like, I'm not telling you, I love my kids. You know, that's very forced. So
that you feel intimate with me.
Yes, I want you to be intimate.
Yes, that's
you know,
right. That's
instead
right.
I show a scene that then, here's the key, because I'm inviting you in to interpret it, that very act is an invitation of intimacy, showing an intimacy, and I'm also trusting your capacity to interpret it. So there's relation all the way down in different ways. Now, there's a very interesting, you know, there's a very interesting part in the New Testament where Jesus basically calls a child over, and the child sits on his knee and says, you know, you got to be like this one if you're going to enter the kingdom of heaven. It's pretty odd. Now, it was probably a young girl, because in that civilization, young girls were the lowest on the totem pole. So there was probably the least will enter first going on there.
So there's a child on the knee and there's another child that gets called over.
No, Jesus calls a child over, and the story points to the religious leaders of the day, points to his followers, you know, points at this child and says, you must become like this.
Got it.
You know, and it's very odd. So very often I think we associate play and reverence as opposites. Like, you don't play where you have reverence. In fact, the only way to properly address what you revere is through a mode of play, because otherwise you don't believe it frees you. Otherwise, you don't believe it's actually worthy of honor. Something that's worthy of honor actually liberates you. It allows you to be yourself and to be free. So if you treat the reverence with a certain stiff seriousness, there's actually a way in which that dishonors it, because you don't actually believe it has any power to liberate you. And so one of the most, there's this odd thing where it seems as if people who do creative acts, you know, you could, not always, but generally, artists, stuff that seems irrelevant, pointless even, some of those people seem to be the most developed. The ones who do these pointless things, they seem the most developed. So there's something about play, if you will, that without you cannot be a full human being. And if the full human being is what is worthy of reverence, that means you must play. That means, in fact, if you have reverential fear, you will play, because that's the only way to engage in it. Now, by reverential fear, I'm using a particular theological term. A better term might be reverence or respect. You don't have to use the word fear there. The irony as well is that the lack of reverence leads to anxiety. Like, very often, if you don't know how to have reverential fear, then you're consumed by anxious fear, if you will. Reverence is it allows you to have a certain appreciation and honoring and know that there's something greater, and thus you're safe. When you are like, when you don't revere anything that basically presents you as the most important thing, even if you don't mean to say that, well, then you know that you're not God. You know that you're fallible. So then you're really anxious. But reverence has a way of providing a certain psychological security and knowing that there actually is more than you. And there actually are relationships and there are things that you can participate in that help give you a certain sense of grounding. You don't have to control everything. If you are everything, then yes, you do have to control everything, which you cannot do unless you will be anxious. But the fun thing about play, what play teaches you is you can actually do something pointless and the world doesn't fall apart, actually. You can do something pointless and actually have a good time. Why was I taking things so seriously? Because you thought you were the most serious thing. What play does is suggest that there's something holding the world together that doesn't need your seriousness all the time, and therefore the world becomes more wonderful. It has more kind of substance to it. It has more sort of there-ness to it, and it's easier to get out of your head. Play gets you out of your head. You would think it's the opposite. You say, what do you mean? Play is imagination to get you in his head. No, play gets you out of your head. It's when you have to take everything seriously and kind of control it all, then all you're doing all day long is calculating how to make sure stuff doesn't screw up, right? Every word I say, every conversation becomes the recitation of the right words in a spell. Because if I say the wrong words, everything's going to blow up. You become a kind of constant conjurer of the right terms and the right way and the right activities, which then, of course, is very anxiety producing. But then at the same time, how do you balance with the seriousness of speaking? Well, you take seriously the seriousness of speaking by crafting it. You take an art seriously by learning the craft. You do not take it seriously by worrying about it. You take it seriously by working at it, which is the practice of play.
Right? It's the surrendering, right? This is the play of surrendering to it, in the belief that at least you might have fun. I mean, like, if that's the only thing that comes out of it and it did end up being pointless, whatever, we had fun. But I actually think it's bigger than that. You do it because you are surrendering to the idea that through that process, it may reveal or provide you with something or a point that you weren't aware of at the start. Like, a point may actually come out of it on the other side. You just don't know what it is yet, and you might not be able to fathom what it is yet, right? And the concept of play as a kind of reverence, it's in a relationship, you actually honor the potentiality and the possibility of the other person. If you can be playful with them, you don't treat them as some rigid construct through, that I must keep narrow and you must remain just within these contours for me because that's who you are to me and that's the only way I value you and that's the only way you should remain. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's quite, it's almost unconsciously, because I am going back to therapy, it is unconsciously giving the signal to the other person in the relationship. I require you to remain in this frame. This is the only way I interact with you. And if you want me to stick around, it's best you stay here and like act like this and be like this. When you are willing to play with an other, you are giving them the signal that they can break free of all those constraints and normal ways of interaction, and that with the hope that you're still there for them. You actually want them to do that. It is a way of recognizing and kindling and supporting the other as well to continue to grow and change. You don't have to just stay as my best friend Jane, at age 15. Like, you don't have to so it does go back to all the other themes we were talking about, and the sense that part of what's going on at Voicecraft is we enter into it with a sort of an honoring an honoring that allow of everyone there, of the relationships, that allows or that is shown through the supporting of play. Like, there is a playfulness and through that, I guess through that, it is about tuning, crafting the voice, ultimately over time. But there is the over time thing here. There's a patience component, which goes back to trust and faith and a willingness to invest and like all these other things that we've also just talked about. It's taking the whole matter so seriously that it's not something that we're just going to meet once and it's done, that it is like ongoing, and that I am signing up to that with you and with this process and with this context, through trust and through faith, and through that everything will necessarily sort of grow and shift, and that is the whole point. And we do that through play, and play is actually a form of honoring what is possible, and not being limited by fear that wants you to be as tightly rationally in control of things as possible, and for things to just remain how you need them to remain and how your little rational brain can make sense of right now. This is an opening up to wonder. And yes.
Well, outstanding. And another way that I think about it is a lot of people want to change things by opposing them. Like, I'm going to oppose capitalism, I'm going to oppose the government, I'm going to fight it. Now, I would have to, if you take my word for it, I think there's very good reason to think that basically efforts of direct opposition very, very rarely work. In fact, they tend to result in a reaction against.
Yes.
If you want to change something, you have to change, I'm going to use a Kantian phrase, but I think it's quite powerful. You have to change the conditions of possibility within it, not oppose it, but change the possibilities within it. Play changes the possibilities within. It's within, and it shows you, wait, we can talk to each other differently. Oh, we can actually play around, we can free ourselves from the construct. A lot of people say, let's have a different kind of conversation. So they're trying to oppose the normal small talk. And actually, this is what a lot of academics and actually what a lot of philosopher people say, we're not going to do small talk. We're going to oppose that with big talk. And then it's rigid and sucks.
Right.
You can't do that. You cannot change things from a spirit of resentment, would be like a Nietzschean term, or like opposition or pride, where you're saying, I can have a better form of conversation than small talk. No, that's completely wrong.
Competitiveness, right? Competitiveness.
It's a prideful competitive. It's not the creative competitiveness, which is the play. Like there's a competitiveness in play that is fun, but then there's a competitiveness of dominance that is prideful and hierarchy and stuff like that. Most people want to change things through rebellion because it's actually, I want to say easier. I do think it's easier. I think it's also more immediate. It also feels more satisfying from your anger side. You also are probably hurt. You're probably hurt by small talk, so your opposition feels justified. Capitalism has given you a terrible job you don't like. The government taxed you too much. Usually oppositions come from a hurt. Well, wounds wound. And when people tend to operate from wounds, they just create more wounds. And then those wounds responses back and forth, and nothing changes. All that changes, you could say, is that the relationships are gone. But the system, that doesn't change. If you want to change things, you have to change the conditions of possibility. And that is what play does. Play changes conditions of possibility. When you do a buffet, as we were saying, you change the conditions of possibility of how this interaction could go without forcing anything. Art is changing the conditions of possibility without opposing anything. You get an idea for The Sound and the Fury. You then change the kind of novel that can be written in the world because a model is there that then everyone can see. You have changed the horizon of what people think is possible. But you didn't like oppose the publishing industry or say, I'm going to beat up James Joyce or something like that. You said, no, you went about your work. William Faulkner's sitting in the back of a wheelbarrow right now as I lay dying. And in doing that, he changes the conditions of possibility of what constitutes literature. And in so doing, that changes a lot. In my opinion, basically, the only way you change anything is to change conditions of possibility. And play is central for changing conditions of possibility. Where there is no play, there will probably be no change. Whatever change occurs will just be a shifting around of what's already there. If you really want to change something like play will be there, because there's something about play that is breaking from structure. But here's the key. It's not from resentment. Most people who want to oppose capitalism or oppose the system or oppose Facebook or whatever, it's an opposition from a place of hurt and you're trying to break against things. But here's the key. The great, Edmund Burke argument is the problem with the French Revolution is they tore everything down and they had nothing to replace it with. So they got Napoleon and but the beauty of play is that in the act of changing conditions of possibility, you are creating something. So it isn't, so you're opposing what's there, but that's a secondary effect to what you're creating. So if you create something different from what's there, there's something there. As opposed to oppositional models, okay, you overthrew the thing, you got rid of all the small talk, and now nobody says anything. Because nobody knows how to do any other kind of conversation. Okay, is this really better? Probably not, because now everyone is atomized, right? So the problem is people want to oppose stuff without creating something alternative to what they oppose. That's why the creative act in changing conditions of possibility is central. So likewise, if you want to have people say relate to each other, there's all this talk about diversity and global pluralism and people getting together. Okay, human history is a long story of difference killing one another. It doesn't tend to go so well. How are you going to make it go well this time? Well, you have to change the conditions of possibility. What's a way to do that? Voicecraft. Voicecraft is a changing of the conditions of possibility of interaction between difference so that we see a difference, as opposed to people saying, well, let's just make it illegal not to be pluralistic. Yes. Let's just make it forceful, right? You're not changing the conditions of possibility because you're opposing the alternative of not being pluralistic. So you bring it together, people are resentful, it all blows up and it doesn't work. If you want it to work, it has to be playful. Diversity will not work if the diversity is not playful, because it has to have this creative structure to it. So play changes conditions of possibility.
Too, right? Yes. It provides the flexibility. It provides that ability for movement that's required. Yes. But somehow, yes. As you were talking, and coming back to this idea of getting to know Daniel the person a little better, as much as you're willing to, for the sake of this recording, you're talking about rebellion and opposing things. What in your life, what comes to mind as things that you have wanted to oppose or rebel against at any point in your life, and maybe when you're a child? Like is there, because I hear this as a theme, like to me it sounds like you have come to a way to relate with these matters that I sense is not purely just through sort of like book learning and what, if you think about your life, are there experiences of things that come to mind that you wanted to oppose and rebel against, or maybe you did? And does any of that inform how you have come to be now in relation to such things? Like, is there knowledge, is there wisdom that has come out of that? Is that, yes?
That's a great question. So I spent my childhood, like I said, walking in the woods, photography business. Maybe I really did like RPGs like Final Fantasy VI or Chrono Trigger on the Super Nintendo, or I would, I'd fight Scott Brown on Street Fighter. I'm pretty good at Street Fighter.
Me too.
Oh gosh,
we'll do that one day. We'll live stream some Street Fighter.
Oh really? Oh my gosh. Oh gosh.
Play. I love that. And Rebellion.
Oh yeah, it's different things.
Go.
So for me, like I did wrestling for about 5 or so years. I did long distance running, 20, cross country, and then like long distance running and different things. I would say for me, like a lot of, I don't know if I want to say I had like a rebellion. What I would say is I was very lucky in the sense that when I guess it was like 8, we would go in the morning and have breakfast sometimes at this diner called Big T. And there were these 4 older gentlemen, Mr. Chapman, Mr. Frey, Mr. Farmer, and Mr. Dillard. And they were there every morning, and the Hudnalls, and I befriended them and basically spent every Friday for 11 years talking with Mr. Dillard for hours and hours, kind of like an elder person. Also, we live on the farm we live on. It's a family farm. My grandparents had that, and I'd go sit on the porch and listen to the stories of my grandfather, World War II, and just his life forever, for many hours, almost every night in the summer. So I was surrounded by a lot of stories. I also, for me, I guess I started the frozen glory photography, which I did for a very long time. I sold like frame. I had deals with like galleries in middle school, showed them in high school and different things like that. It was very clear to me that, I guess from watching and just listening to stories, that directly opposing things or being upset at things doesn't change anything. Like if you say, I don't want a job, I hate capitalism, whatever, well, okay, you're still in it, buddy. And actually now you're behind. So for me, I guess I grew up going, you have to do different things. Like you can't just like, so like, it was like, if you work for someone, you don't own the assets. You have limited control on your time. And you also probably don't, like if you run the photography business, you can get better at photography, own your skill, and then market it within areas you want to, right? So, and also like if I was working on I spent all the time working on the Sword of Tribulation for 8 years, a science fiction series, seven books. I would like sit in the, like I would definitely sit in class and fall asleep and just secretly be working. If you want to say what was the closest rebellion thing, is I sat in the back of classes and worked on my own stuff, and like my photography businesses or whatever, I didn't really care because it was clear to me that it did. I guess it was like it as long as I could get the grades and whatever, this was kind of a ritual. It was arbitrary. And it was not also something like the Sword of Tribulation after high school, whatever. I had this. This was something I was working on that was mine, that changed the conditions, the possibilities of what I could do. I found it very important to use my time in a manner that I kind of, let me put it this way, it was compounding. Yeah. I think most people don't live their life with a compounding strategy. You must live your life with a compounding strategy. What you use your time on must be something that the next moment compounds on, because then you have something. Like if you are just following a sequence to get a job, you are completely at the mercy of whoever provides you those opportunities, right? And so then you can't own anything and you can't change your conditions of possibility.
That's exactly what you do with the opening, with the conversation thing that we were talking about. You've just put words to, I think, what I was trying to describe, that in the use of banter and a buffet technique and all these things, right, that, you know, anyone could find a little surface level to try and pick apart. Actually, under the hood of that, it's that same, you're doing the same thing, I think, is what you're talking about there. It sounds like you've just always been aware to some extent of, I don't know how to put it, but almost like this great stretch before us, and needing to take that into account as well, and just sort of the field of possibility and potentiality, and as opposed to just a very acute focus on right in this moment, what is the next step in the sequence, like a linearity. It's a really beautiful quality. And it's something, like I'm hearing that it's something that you had very early on. There seems to be, so when you were sitting in the back of the class and you were working on your own stuff, and you might not remember this, but were you sort of inside in conflict about that? Was there sort of an emotional tension or an uncertainty about should I, shouldn't I, or you just felt complete sort of like license and freedom to do that just that sort of the knowing that is, like, where were you at? I'm trying to get the emotional tone.
It didn't bother me in the slightest. I had no tension. I was like, yeah, this makes more sense. Like it was just like it was not a tense thing. In the same way that, you know, so I should also note that I just have very good parents as well. Like my father, I'd stand up at the garage and talk with him. He was a football coach. So there's a lot of sports. There's a lot of fights. Like the key also to how I was taught sports from dad or just with wrestling is the number one thing is not to quit. Yes. You can't always control if you win. You can't always control if you're like, I remember I got paired up in the regionals with the 4-time state champion from Christiansburg as a little like freaking sophomore or whatever. There was literally no possibility of winning. You could say, yeah, there is. No, there's not. But there is a possibility of not getting pinned. There is the possibility where he doesn't pin you. So then what your mind goes to is what would be victory here? And to be real about that relative to what's going on. And it was to not get pinned. So that also, I think, was important because you're working with the possibilities, like the actual conditions of possibility that you have to get a win, as opposed to something naive. Yes. Right? So that also, and then also that the key principle of sports was the fight. Like the fight, because here's the key. The fight is what you bring with you more than the wins. You think the wins are what you bring with you? No. Wins are irrelevant. What you bring with you is the fight. And so that is a compounding factor. So I think by just having that kind of wrestling, I think because I did stories for so long as well, that I had the structure of paragraph, paragraph, paragraph. And if you do this every day for 8 years, you have 7 books. So the experience of art is compounding. I think building a portfolio is compounding, like a camera. You get relationships. The other thing too is I had zero qualms with making my central concern in, say, school or UVA or different things, people. Like I was way more concerned with meeting people than classes or any of that nonsense, because I don't know about you, I don't actually remember anything basically from a lot of the classes in college, except with Wilson or Broy, and like the ones I'm still friends with or interact with, like their life-changing lectures. John Nemec, I did a lot in Hindu studies and different things, concentrate, and then William Wilson and literature and different things. Like I remember them because I still email them and different things and they're friends, but the majority of you don't. But
through relationship, right? That's it. You remember them precisely because you're.
But I still regularly interact with people from the Jefferson Literary and Debating Society. I would do so another thing is a great mistake that people make, in my opinion, is they do the work in their room. You need to do your work in the foyer of the library in a place, and here's the key: you need to be in the same place regularly so people know where they can find you.
Yes.
Because if so the other thing, now a really important thing, you must every day, in my opinion, live in a manner that you are building something with no expectation of what you're building.
Yes.
That's the key. You have to be building something with no expectation of what that is. You have a sense that you are building something. That's all you get. That is what you get. You get a sense that you are compounding and building, and you have to trust in the process, but you must not need to confirm the process. Because if you confirm it, it is no longer play. Play builds as long as you don't seek a guarantee. The moment you seek a guarantee, it is mechanized and dead. And so you
that's the trust in a relationship too, though, right? It's the knowing that if I really, with this person who I love, if I really treat them, I guess, with this honor and this play, knowing that to do that might actually open them up to becoming something else, or to it might open up to the relationship changing also.
Yes.
It's risky.
Absolutely.
A risky move, but is it for, like, so yes, anyway, I've cut you off. What were you
No, you didn't cut me. Well, that's exactly right. And the thing is, you, like a lot of people learn, I have the knowledge, now I can oppose something and fix it. No, you have to create the conditions of possibility. You have to change the conditions of possibility, and that's all relational. Yes. That's all. Now, the thing is, one of the reasons why the Tri-Tune conversations tend to involve philosophy is because there is something unique about philosophy and its capacity to make many one, to go to depth, back to the top. The reason the Tri-Tune conversations tend to be philosophical is not because they try to be philosophical, but because the word philosophy describes the most human movement of depth, tops, many, one, these multi-dimensional movements of thought. The only word we have to describe it generally is philosophy, and it seems philosophy. But it is extremely important to note that that kind of philosophy is very different from academic philosophy. I could not stand academic philosophy.
No, I know.
I could not stand most classrooms. Completely disastrous. There's no better way to just hate all the most important things than to take classes on them. So
agreed.
So
Voicecraft is the opposite of a class on something.
Yes. And so so there's a lot with learning. So I wouldn't say I had a rebellious phase. I probably had a stupid phase. But I also had just elders, older people, older generations, and just seeing and watching. I guess I could just watch. I tended to watch things, I guess, and notice things. Probably comes from writing, but also photography, and just see what worked and what didn't work. What mattered. The other thing too, like, so for example, before, I guess between 2000, so I did a photography business. I did that for years and years. I was in a literary magazine, Wide Awake, that I helped. I was in choir. I would review Balate. We sang. I did singing for a long time. I was in high school. I did choir. So I did all these things, but one of the things, so Eunoia, old building, gradually with the great Stone, nickname Stone Dragon, Matt Bartley, Nicole, we had Leanne there. There are many more. Denio, I can keep naming people. We transformed it into a place called Eunoia, and we were interested in the question, what does the artist compel? It was Eunoia means beautiful thinking, loosely translated, but it brings together good thinking, beautiful thinking. Greek, you would know that. So it's, it's different things. And we went with that name, and it was a art gallery, venue, and performance place that was an operation, and I was there from 2009, 2008 to 2014, so I guess 7 or so years. And we had Wind, and we brought on Evan Hansen, interviewed him. He became sort of and then Bernard came on. So it was a group of us that were running a kind of community space that we did for many years. We had meals on Thursdays, we had open mics. Bernard and I taught classes bringing together like hip hop and classical poetry. We had stained glass. We also did Cypher Tank, where we use kids interested in hip hop freestyling to do think tank structures for brand names and so on and so forth. So all of this, which was a community, it was a building and so on and so on. But this was all compounded. This was way more important than anything else. And helped run this place for a long time, as I did writing, the sort of tribulation, digressions, reading. My friend Vincent once told me it was outside of New Kid, my beloved Vincent, and he came up, and I was like, he was like, Dan, I have an idea. I was like, what's that? He's like, I'm thinking about only taking like 8 credits this semester. I'm like, really? It's like, yeah. And you know what I'm gonna do? I was like, what? It's like, I thought, like, what if you were to read like 200 pages a day? Wouldn't that be amazing? Like, you just took like a few and it's like read 200 pages a day. And I was like, that's what I'm thinking I'm going to do. And he left. And I thought that was the coolest idea, because it occurred to me, it's like, there's all these books that you're interested in ideas, but you're never actually going to get around to it. Right. So then it was a goal to like read 200 pages a day or a book or whatever, and did that from like, not that I always hit 200 a day, but it was the idea of like reading, making a space in your life to read the books that you wanted to read, or different things. So that was also another goal at Eunoia, running Frozen Glory. We did work with Tom. So the idea, I would say, is all of these were in the realm of compounding things, things that would kind of build, as opposed to creating a resume. Because when you build a resume, you're at the mercy of someone who approves of that resume, right? And I still, like Ty and Latasha were here the other day with Eunoia, still there. As an organization, and you have those relationships. Now, after that, in 2014, when Michelle and I got married, we met in 2011. Well, we actually met in 2008, and then got married around 2014, June. And then I worked at a wholesale until 2019, unloading trucks, manual labor. And then at the same time, also around 2015, went over to Mead Lake to work the venue, and then OG Rose. So we did those with all those at the same time. And so we built up, here's the key, you're building up Mead Lake. So then when COVID comes in, you have something you can fall back on, and so on. So it was manual labor, did that. And I also, while it was also very important for me, if you're doing manual labor and you can work on OG Rose, all the fiction and things, then while you're doing the manual labor, you're also building something that's yours and that's compounding, right? If you went and did a white collar job, you probably just simply would not have the time or energy or whatever to do that, right? And so I guess you could say a lot of my thinking, or just the way I've thought about things, is compounding strategies. And also too, I guess the other thing, it was also quite clear to, I guess, just watching, it was not obvious to me that white collar work was a better option. In fact, it looked like it was often a worse option. It did not seem as if, for the amount of it. Here's a way to put it.
Your body, it is, isn't it? I mean, your body dies. You're just sitting. It does. Your body, it's the death of your body. And like, because what I'm hearing as you talk is I'm hearing a lot of I guess, embodiment, like they're talking about sports, but especially the kinds of sports you're talking about, like the wrestling and like, long distance running, and the learning to really be with your physiology and push it to its limits, and to feel your limbs and all of these things. And then even manual labor, like it's the same. It's to actually feel the fatigue of your body. And like, these things are so important. You go do a white collar job, you lose your body, and yeah.
Well, and the other mistake, I guess, is that people do not ask what you're paid per year. Ask what you're paid by the hour. That's what you're really paid. The
Yeah,
big mistake people make is they say, "Oh, I'm going to make 100,000 a year."
that's so
Okay,
true.
but what are you making per hour? I could be possibly making 60,000 a year and actually making more per hour than you.
Yes.
So it's one of the big mistakes that then people you are making what you make per hour, not annually. Make sure you're happy with that number, whatever it is. And it's what I found actually is that it's very difficult to make a satisfying amount per hour if you do not own the thing, or if it's not compounding, or it's not a craft. Now, again, you may be perfectly, I'm not saying that someone who's making, you may be perfectly happy, but the issue is, do note, be very aware if you are not doing anything compounding. Just be very aware of that, because one of the things that, because this is why, if there's something about play that's connected to full humanity and changing conditions of possibility, it seems to me that what you play with is what you compound.
Yeah.
That's the thing you get to play with. And it does not seem like you get to play with much else. Yes. It doesn't seem like you get to play with the job given to you by someone else. It doesn't seem like you get to play with anything but whatever the thing is you compounded. And that's probably, it seems like it has to be a craft, has to be an art, has to be an entrepreneurship, has to be something that maybe got you a lot of rejection. Because here's the thing, the things that you own are probably not socially acknowledged, right? Yeah. That's why you own them. That's why you have control. And the other thing too, again, people will be like, oh man, you're sounding like you want to own everything and control everything. If the artist must own his canvas to paint on it, the artist has to have control over something to have something made to give. You can't give anything if you have no control. And so the thing is, the key to compounding is so that you're able to play. If you don't have anything you've been compounding, you won't be able to play. And the thing is, if you take that seriously, then start compounding right now. Because the other thing I'll say is a lot in life. So one of the things I think is also interesting is often like with money, for example, sometimes the cost of living is more than you think, but it actually doesn't have to be more than you fear. What you fear can be what drives you nuts. Likewise, when it's like, oh my gosh, where do you even start? The amount of compounding you need to do to have something to play with is probably more than you think, but not more than you fear. The other problem that we do is we tend to go, oh man, I need years. You probably don't need years. You probably need months, maybe a year, but a year is not very long. Like the other thing too is like a lot of people always say, man, I wish I could like gain a skill or whatever. If you realize that there's a lot of middle spaces of time, like months and weeks, not decades, or 2 years, not 10 years, the brain tends to go to 10 years versus 2 years. There are many things you can do in 2 years that then give you something very powerful that's compounded, and 2 years is not long.
No, and no. The older you get, it seems to go faster.
That's right. And if you start thinking about a compounding mentality right now, yes, it may be 2 years. 2 years is nothing. It is nothing. It doesn't have to be 10 years, but it can be 2 years if you think about it. So anyway, I guess you could say for me that in orbiting, I guess my personal life is more focused on changing conditions of possibility through strategies of conditioning, because without that, you cannot play, which means you cannot revere the human being. And so all of those are kind of, I guess, kind of in the biography, scattered here and there, I suppose.
Yes, no, I hear that. I hear that as such a strong through line. It seems that was there quite early on, at least in the manner that you're describing, that this inside you. I'm weary of time, and I'm going to have to wrap up in a minute, Daniel. But in terms of Voicecraft and your contribution there, your experience with Voicecraft, is there anything that seems alive for you and that you would want to share if the person listening is someone who is entering that context for the first time, or they're relatively new, or they're not sure if they want to? I mean, is there anything that comes to your mind that we haven't spoken about that comes from your experience of interacting with Voicecraft?
I think there is definitely an increasing and gaining sense that what Voicecraft does is important, as
Mm,
opposed to just a kind of sense. Like it's more, there's more conviction actually increasingly in it. Now, all the liminal web spaces are dealing with economic sustainability and questions like that, but the conviction of the legitimacy, the importance of it is only growing. And it certainly is for me. And that there's increasingly a conviction in the positive sense of a conviction that Voicecraft is indeed some sort of art that is necessary for humanity and engaging in relationships, especially diverse relationships, especially ones that are going to be engaging with the tritone that
yeah.
seems so necessary today in the world. So I think there's an increasing conviction of that. I would definitely say that for anyone listening to this, wondering if they should join into Voicecraft, if you I think there's a feeling that maybe not everyone, I like to think everyone, but lots of people had where one day they were maybe walking, maybe they walked by an alley, maybe they were sitting somewhere, they saw a tree, and there was a sense, just a kind of like the breeze, that there's some sort of mystery to life, some sort of capital M mystery that's very alive, and there's some sort of vibrancy behind everything, and then it's gone. Maybe, you know, and they just sense it. Maybe you see something, you heard something, and there was a sense of a mystery, and then it's gone. Some have called it the sacred romance, some have called it the Holy Spirit, some have called it beauty. Take it what you will. But if you have a sense that there's something evanescent and yet more real in it, precisely because it is evanescent. Very often we associate evanescence with less real, but these experiences that we are describing are the experiences where you realize that there's something evanescent that's more real, and yet it's very difficult to know how to find it. If you knew how to find it, it wouldn't be evanescent, right? But there is a sense, just like the artist who engages in training or conditioning. I think Picasso said that indeed inspiration is outside of your control. It tends to come to me at my desk, though, every morning at the same time. In the sense of inspiration is something you don't control, but you can work to create the conditions of the increased frequency of its occurrence.
Right.
I think this sacred romance is quite similar. I think it is something that you can work at the conditions to increase the regularity by which you experience it. And Voicecraft is a place to work and create those conditions, because I think they actually are tied into the arts of voice. I think the voice is somehow humanly connected to that sacred romance. It is some sort of channeling of it. It is some sort of connection to it. Why not? It's hard to say, but if you do it, you sense it. And if you do it, you experience it. And so for those who have had a sense of the sacred romance, I would encourage you to try Voicecraft, because it is the art form by which is crafting the voice to better speak that romance and to sing its praises.
Beautiful. Yeah, that's a lovely place to wrap up. Thank you, Daniel. This has been lovely, and I've tried to keep the focus as much as possible on you know, coming back to finding out more about the person of Daniel. I don't know how successful I was. But I must say, actually, no, I think I was, because I think we were, because I'm leaving this now feeling that I know a lot more about you as a person. I have a yeah, I have much more of a sense of some of the ways that now I can understand a little better, is what I'm trying to say, about why you're so good at all of this. Like why it is, you know, and I really respect that, and I really appreciate you opening up in this way and taking a gamble here to play on some kind of, God knows what we're making here, something.
Well, Aspasia, it's been a treat. Thank you. Appreciate it.
You too. I'll
Best to
see
you.
you soon. All right.
See you soon. All the best.